In the heart of southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, carved a crescent of life into a harsh, dry land. Between them stretched a fertile plain, where silt-rich floods fed the earth but also threatened destruction. This land would become known as Sumer, the first civilization in human history. Here, around 5000 BCE, early communities began to form along the banks of the rivers. These people didn't merely survive, they adapted. They built irrigation canals to control the unpredictable waters, transforming flooding into food. The rivers brought not just danger, but the promise of abundance. As settlements grew, so did cooperation. Families became communities, and communities became culture. The rich black soil gave rise to farming, architecture, and the first steps toward organized society. In the silence of the plains, amid the sounds of flowing water and shifting reeds, humanity was preparing to write its first chapter in a land cradled by rivers and bound by vision. By 4500 BCE, in the warm flatlands of southern Mesopotamia, a quiet transformation was underway. The Ubaid people, often overlooked, but never insignificant, built the region's first known villages. No longer wandering, they settled beside rivers in homes made of sun-dried mudbrick. These weren't simple camps. They were foundations of the world's first true communities. Their villages were organized, featuring central temples made not of grandeur, but of purpose. These communal structures, constructed from mudbrick and reeds, were more than places of worship. They were centers of authority, ritual, and cooperation. Within them, early religious practices took form, guided by priests who may have also been the first civic leaders. The Ubaid dug irrigation canals with wooden tools, coaxing life from stubborn earth. They raised grain, herded animals, and crafted pottery with unique painted designs. Families worked, traded, and planned together. Bit by bit, a cultural identity was forming, one that would set the stage for something much greater. These early settlements became the soil in which the Sumerian civilization would root and flourish. As the early villages of the Ubaid era laid the groundwork for settled life, the Sumerians took the next step, mastering the rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates, once unpredictable and destructive, were now harnessed by complex systems of canals, levees, and reservoirs. Through careful engineering, the Sumerians transformed seasonal flooding into steady irrigation, making agriculture more reliable and expansive. Fields of barley, wheat, and date palms thrived across the fertile floodplain. This steady food supply supported growing populations and allowed people to specialize. Some became potters, builders, merchants, or priests. Trade networks extended beyond Sumer, exchanging crops and goods for raw materials like stone and metal. Their control of water wasn't just survival, it was civilization. The surplus it created enabled cities to grow, supported temples and writing, and made large-scale governance possible. In every canal and furrow, the seeds of urban life had been planted, and the world's first cities were ready to rise. With irrigation systems firmly in place and settlements thriving, the stage was set for the emergence of a new identity. By around 3500 BCE, a distinct people, the Sumerians, rose to prominence in southern Mesopotamia. Though their exact origins remain uncertain, their language stood apart from all others, a language isolate, unrelated to Semitic or Indo-European tongues. The Sumerians inherited the legacy of the Ubaid and pushed it forward. Temple design became more elaborate, with central complexes dominating their towns. Villages evolved into organized cities, laid out with intention and hierarchy. Their culture signaled a profound shift. Religious, political, and economic life became more structured. Urban civilization had begun, and with it came writing, administration, and monumental architecture. The land between the rivers was no longer just fertile ground, it was now home to history's first true cities, shaped by the hands and minds of the Sumerians. With the rise of the Sumerians came a true urban revolution. Around 3,300 BCE, settlements like Eridu, Ur, and Uruk expanded into full-fledged cities, each home to thousands. At their heart stood towering temples, surrounded by bustling workshops, markets, and administrative quarters. These were not just population centers, they were engines of innovation. Craftsmen produced fine pottery, textiles, and metal goods, while merchants traded across Mesopotamia and beyond. Scribes kept detailed records of crops, goods, and labor. Urban life brought new systems: tax collection, organized labor, and land distribution. Public works, such as canals and roads, required coordination. Rulers and temple officials directed this complex society, making early cities both economic and political powerhouses. As people gathered under the authority of gods and kings, Sumer cities became the blueprint for future civilizations. What began as humble villages had grown into the world's first true urban societies. At the core of every great Sumerian city stood a massive temple complex, often built atop a stepped platform called a ziggurat. Each city pledged devotion to a patron god or goddess: Inanna in Uruk, Enlil in Nippur, or Nanna in Ur. The temple was both a sacred space and the beating heart of the city's economy. These temples owned vast lands, herds, and storehouses. Priests and temple officials managed resources, collected offerings, directed laborers, and organized distribution. Religious devotion was intertwined with practical governance. Festivals, sacrifices, and rituals brought people together, reinforcing loyalty and order. Statues of deities were bathed, clothed, and fed, treated as living beings. The temple symbolized stability, prosperity, and divine favor. Through worship and wealth, the Sumerians believed their gods maintained order. In honoring them, cities found both spiritual meaning and material power, binding faith to everyday survival. As Sumerian cities grew, so too did their need for leadership and order. Initially, priests held power, acting as mediators between people and gods. But over time, a new class emerged: priest kings, known as Ensi or Lugal, who led both in temple rituals and city defense. They wielded both spiritual and political authority. Sumerian society became increasingly stratified. At the top stood priests and rulers, followed by scribes, merchants, artisans, farmers, and at the bottom, slaves, often prisoners of war or debtors. Each class had specific duties in maintaining the city's survival and prosperity. Cooperation was essential. Vast irrigation systems, shared granaries, and defense walls required organized labor and leadership. These responsibilities strengthened local governments centered in temples and palaces. As roles became fixed, gender divisions also sharpened. Men dominated public life and leadership, while women's roles were often tied to the home or temple service. Social hierarchy and political structure became the foundation of Sumerian civilization. By the late 4th millennium BCE, Sumer had become the center of a growing web of trade. Caravans and boats connected it to regions far beyond. The Zagros Mountains to the east, the Persian Gulf to the south, and the Levant to the west. These routes brought exotic goods, copper, tin, timber, and luxury items into the Sumerian heartland. With expanding trade came new challenges. Managing warehouses, workers, and shipments required structured administration. Labor became more specialized. Some farmed, others crafted, traded, or kept records. As temple economies grew complex, the need to track goods, taxes, and labor laid the foundation for a revolutionary invention: writing, which would fully emerge in the next era. This age marked the transition from simple village life to urban civilization. With organized religion, governance, trade, and early record-keeping, the Sumerians weren't just building cities, They were building civilization itself.